2 weeks into the Israel-U.S. led war on Iran, and the world feels increasingly unstable. Oil prices have surged, global markets have swung, and we are all trying to make sense of what comes next. Welcome to Put Simply, the podcast that puts what's happening in the world simply without compromising on the details. I'm Erdem Koch, joined by Ozan, Ibrisim and Rodney, McCune. Gents, wonderful to be back in what continues to be a trying time for the world. Ozan, take us through what's happened since we spoke last, which was only just a few days after this war started. It feels like it's been a lifetime. We are seeing the death toll continuing to climb, Iran still defending itself and launching attacks across the region. There's a new supreme leader. So much has happened. Can you give us the headlines before we try to put everything in context?
Look, certainly many things have happened, but at the same time, we know we're closer to actually understanding the endgame in this conflict. I think the uncertainty around how this conflict ends, with what type of Iranian regime, with what type of deal or anything like that, we're very far away from actually seeing any end to this conflict. As you mentioned, there's a new supreme leader of Iran, the son of the previous supreme leader, who was, of course, killed during one of the attacks. And his supreme leader, Moshtaba Khamenei, he's the son of the previous leader, and he's the gentleman who Trump famously commented on would be a very poor choice for the new supreme leader. In fact, Trump insisted that he should have some say over who the next Iranian leader would be. So some very interesting developments on that. He's considered as quite a hardline leader. And if you're looking at the kind of politics of his appointment, it's very clear that it's the regime very much indicating or demonstrating a willingness to continue resisting the attacks and resisting the pressure from both Iran and the US on in this war. It sends a very clear message that Iran will not bow down to the pressure. The new Khomeini is rumored to be. There's been different ways that he's been described in the media, but he's rumored to be one of the kind of key figures in the background during his father's term as Khomeini, as the supreme leader. Sorry, so he's no stranger to the the ins and outs of the Iranian regime. He's a cleric himself, and whilst he's not held any prominent public office previously, everybody, I think, is unanimous in their view that he's certainly very much an insider, and in fact, to the point where it's been claimed that he's run the show for quite some time in the background, and is commands great deal of respect from very much the hardline elements of the regime. So that's, I guess, one of the biggest developments. The death toll continues to mount, both in both in Lebanon through the attacks from Israel directly, and also in Iran. Of course, it's become much more clearer since we last spoke that the school that was bombed, it appears that it was bombed by a US missile. So that's obviously something that's very concerning for many in the US and has made pretty much news. We've had in the oil prices you mentioned has gone up. I think the top it hit was, I think, 115 US or 117 US dollars per barrel. And just to put some context to that, the last time it was that high was at the start of the Ukraine-Russia war. And we know what happened in terms of inflation and the economic kind of downturn that that caused as a result of high oil prices. So it seems to be going up and down. It's, I think, hovering around 95 at the time of recording, $95. I think the bottom line here is that many investors and particularly central banks are considerably concerned about a level of high inflation once again. So there is talk of many central banks looking at their monetary policy and holding off what may have been perhaps a period of bringing down the interest rates, which would have been a big relief for the business community. So obviously that's something that's going to kind of be held off from that point of view. Some other interesting things. Trump claimed, I think within the space of about 2 or 3 hours, President Trump claimed that they had won big and they'd done a lot and were very close to victory. And then he pulled that, and then the oil prices went down, and then he pulled that comment back and said, actually, no, we've got a long way to go still. We still need to do a lot more and what have you. And then the oil prices went a little bit up again from that point of view. So, I don't think anything's changed on the fundamentals of this conflict, Adam and Rodney, in terms of, we still have an administration that has absolutely no plan. The intelligence community came out. There was an article in the New York Post overnight where they've seen some intelligence reporting saying that the Iranian regime is very much intact and does not look like in the short term falling at all. So, uh, firstly, there's no purpose of this in terms of a properly stated purpose. And if that purpose is regime change, then it doesn't look like this is having much of an impact. And that's according to, the US's own intelligence sources. So, whilst much has happened, not much has changed. We still have a conflict with no end in sight.
It begs the question that so many commentators have been asking around if the ultimate objective here, as stated by Israel and the US, was for regime change. How much of that is now accomplished? We've seen the death of the supreme leader and the Ayatollah, and his son, as you mentioned, Ozan, someone who is seen as an insider to the previous regime, has now taken over uh, the the governance of the country, if you will. It seems to me, Rodney, that if that was the objective, then it hasn't been achieved, and yet we're hearing from Trump that it could be over relatively soon because there's nowhere left to bomb in Iran.
So we know his timeframes can be a little bit unreliable when it comes to the ending of a conflict, because the Ukraine war, when he assumed the presidency again, he was going to end within 24 hours. So I don't think we should place great weight on whatever soon means. What there has been on the part of America and possibly Israel, but Israel's objectives and motivation may be very different, is that the regime appears to be functioning and entrenched, and removing the leadership has not removed the regime. And therefore, if that was the objective, and it may or may not be, because the objective of this war or conduct on the part of the US and Israel still remains unclear as to whether it's regime change, whether it's to deal with enriched uranium that was supposed to have been put back for a generation months ago, or it's something different. I mean, I think the one thing that we can rule out with a degree of confidence is that it's being done mindful of the human rights and welfare of Iranian citizens. And that's not the motivation of either the US or Israel. There's no motivation to liberate or free from a uh, tyrannical regime or so on. So therefore, we're left with what is the strategic benefit and motivation. And what's clear as well is, or what's clear possibly the objectives of the US in this, is the strategy in response of the Iranians. It's not to defeat America or even Israel militarily. It's to make it as expensive and painful as possible to continue with offensive actions. So yeah, it's I think we're not able to determine when it's going to end because we have no idea what they're trying to achieve in all honesty. And it doesn't appear that the Iranians are folding or going to make some great concessions. The fact that the International Energy Agency has made such a dramatic intervention to say it's going to release 400 million barrels of oil uh, is significant because you don't do that if you think that the thing is going to settle down in the short term or that the flow in the Straits of Hormuz is going to suddenly open again and be safe and secure. It feels like when you have a step like that, it's not just to reassure and try and keep pricing down. It's to intervene and provide resource. So I think that is pretty significant. I think that we will we won't have this for forever because it doesn't feel like um the Americans can keep up with weapons production at a level that they're required for how much money and kit that they've spent so early on in this. So that may well be what sort of ends this and the well runs dry and there's some attempt at face saving. But I still think we've got a couple more weeks possibly of that. But not with objectives achieved. I don't see that objectives will be achieved.
Yeah, I think it's very significant that the Hormuz Straits overnight Iran has I think attacked a number of civilian ships, a couple of civilian oil tankers. Um, this is a body of water where 20% of the world's trade goes through. A lot of it being oil, obviously, and this is something that the world economy and President Trump and his administration are not going to be able to sustain for a very long time, uh, considering, we're already now talking about a projection of inflation going up. There's excuse me. There's also some pretty bad news coming out of China. They've revised their growth projections, I think down to 4% from 5%. So it's when you're looking at the economic indicators and what's in store for 2026, it's certainly nothing to be optimistic or positive about. So it's not, it's, kind of the old mentality of, oh, war can always create economic growth and economic activity, etc., is, might have made sense in previous times. But when there's a war and there's, at stake oil prices and the supply of oil, this is certainly not going to end all that well for the world economy. But to Rodney's point, there is it it doesn't appear to be, or there doesn't appear to be any point in which either side can point to a victory or an objective met. So um, it could well be, and it could well be that President Trump puts out a press release or a Truth Social in a week and said our objectives have been, have been completed. We've like he did when they bombed Iran's nuclear facilities. We've weakened the regime to the point where it's not going to last, etc. That's our job done. Now it's up to the Iranian people. Uh, so it's very likely that he could put something like that up. He said this a week or 2 weeks ago when the airstrikes started, to say that we're giving an opportunity to the Iranian people of an opportunity of a generation, and they need to take it up and overthrow the government, etc. So um, whilst it's completely ridiculous to make such claims or to make such suggestions, there's no there's absolutely no reason for why he can't finish this war and just claim victory. He's got record on this. He's claimed that he's done 8 peace deals since coming into office. He's he's the peace president, and he's talking about 8 peace deals, solving or resolving wars that don't even exist. So I wouldn't put it past him just to put a truth social, and then it's kind of over.
Well, you mentioned the earlier attacks on Iran and how that supposedly effectively disarmed them of their nuclear capabilities and weakened the regime. But one of the things that we're hearing from President Trump is that he was fearful that Iran would attack the US first, and that's why he went in this time. And now, of course, there's discussions around all the sleeper cells and the potential attacks that we could be seeing on US bases, consulates, embassies, US soil, even from this, for a lack of a better term, awakened sort of group of people who are vehemently opposed to what the US and Israel are doing in Iran at the moment. And then, of course, there's what Caroline Levitt, the US, the spokesperson for the White House and for Trump, has said around if they continue to block the Strait of Hormuz, they're going to be attacked 20 times worse than what they are. I mean, Rodney, how do you make sense of all of this? Can you make sense of all of this? What is true? What is
Just
actually
words
happening?
coming out of the mouth of an idiot. I mean, that's basically what it is, I'm afraid. And I don't think we should put it any higher. 20 times harder is just a made up multiple, right? Uh, I was afraid of being attacked is something he says because he thinks that it sounds a reasonable preemptive strike type argument, but he hasn't thought through the fact that he said he's already removed their ability to threaten the US. He says stuff without ever expecting to be challenged on it or be held accountable or it be put to him what he's previously said. Then he just gets cross and throws a tantrum and calls a reporter or whoever asks a question dumb. You work for a fake news outlet, etc., etc. I think what he's saying is a window into how little thinking is going on in the background. He also tried to blame Rubio, Vance, and Hegseth for advising him that that he thought that an attack was imminent, and it was him accepting what they said about some assessment. I've no doubt that he doesn't read anything, and I've got a feeling, based on facts. Then, is how his spokesperson translated that. It's all just garbage. There may be proper thinking behind this, but he is absolutely unable to have that proper thinking himself or articulate it if there is proper thinking. He just comes across as such a fool. It's very strange behavior.
Which then I guess begs the question, Ozan, is this Trump's war or is this Netanyahu's war?
Look, I think it's a bit of both. I think there's certainly many political reasons for why Netanyahu wants to do this. There's probably strategic reasons. In fact, he's himself said that he's been wanting to do this for 40 years. So I think for him it's clear. But I think uh, there's no doubt that some of this is a distraction from the internal domestic politics, of which, in the US, the Epstein files is a huge factor, I think. And in that case, there was something very interesting and very funny from posted by Ian Bremer, talking about the fact that right now I think Trump would prefer people in the US talking about the Epstein files than $115 a barrel oil prices. So I think at the outset, it there's no doubt that it was a distraction from the political issues that he's facing domestically. From a strategic geopolitical point of view, he wants to kind of back in Israel on this sort of stuff with Netanyahu. Um, I mean, people who are probably much more informed of the machinations of that relationship could probably know exactly why. but he would be the first president in U.S. history to kind of follow Israel's lead on something. It's usually the other way around. Whilst Israel and the US have always enjoyed a very close relationship, the power dynamic between those two countries has usually been swaying more towards the US having the power and the weapons, etc. So I think it's both of their wars, and the funny thing in all of this is the person who's going to come out worse from this, I think, is Trump, because he's already facing significant backlash within the US community and within his own domestic politics. He's There are constantly approval rating polls that are coming out. I think his average approval rating based on the Real Clear Politics, which is a fantastic source for this stuff. It's kind of an aggregator of the various different credible polls that have come out, and it gives an average. And right now, his approval rating's 43.3%, and that's pretty much an average of all of the polls that have come out. There are some outliers within those polls. A few of the polls that have come out recently have him at 39-40% of approval rating. And just to put that into context, Biden was always claimed to have been very, very unpopular, particularly after what happened in terms of the Afghanistan withdrawal, etc. And at this point in Biden's term, so we're talking March 2022. You effectively had Biden sitting on 42% on the same indicator, which is the average of the Real Clear Politics average. So, he's getting to that territory of being very unpopular. And I think whilst it's both of their wars, the bigger loser here is going to be President Trump.
Well, and the rest of the world in many ways, right? I mean, we are seeing death and destruction, of course, in Iran, death and destruction across the region. But we are seeing the economic impacts already start to take place with the oil prices where they are. We know not only from basic economics, but from very recent world events. Think about COVID, the pandemic, think about the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and the incredible inflationary pressure that the rising of oil prices has put on the entire world, and how much of a struggle it has been economically for the rest of the world. And Rodney, Trump's response to that is, and not just him, but everyone that they've deployed to the American media, is this is short-term pain for long-term gain.
I mean, he was boasting about it was State of Union. He was boasting about the price at the pump, etc. in America, and how great a job that he had done. And he did that on a weekend, and by the beginning of the next week, he had thrown the global oil prices absolutely out of control by his intervention in Iran. And it's not like he couldn't have seen it coming, or well, maybe he couldn't. It's not like people around him couldn't have seen it coming, that they couldn't game out what Iran's strategy was going to be, to share the pain across the region, to try and pressure the global economy in asymmetric warfare, because they're not going to go toe to toe with the Americans on stealth fighters and other things. Iran's invested in missiles and drones for a reason. It allows them to execute the strategy that they've prepared for. And it feels like the US didn't really get it. It's just crazy. Yeah, it's I mean, maybe he or people around him make money out of the way his chaos is able to spike and drop markets and pricing and all these other things. Maybe they do, but it just, if you remove the self gain element from it, it's just pure chaos.
I mean, look, if you talk to business leaders, those in senior positions, particularly those in positions of allocating investment, etc., uh, you know, they'll tell you that the last 5, 6 years have been very difficult, but particularly the last 18 months has been excruciating because it's not only a war in Iran, it's effectively having no ability to invest or plan to invest with certainty. We saw that in with the tariff policies and the announcements, etc., the going back and forth on the tariffs and all of these sorts of things. And interest rates are already at a higher level. It's if you're running a business, which some of us are, you know, and they're small businesses, obviously, but you've had a constant, I suppose, period of just having being knocked about. And it doesn't matter how well you run your business. It doesn't matter how well you work on your product, your customer service, how well you manage your cash flow, all of the fundamentals of business. Nothing that you do can change the fact that the economy is effectively working against you. And this has been the case since effectively COVID in a broad sense, but it's really, really intensified in the last 18 months because, every time you talk to people, they're either cutting down costs or holding off on project investments. And, this is this cannot go on for too long because at the end of the day, the only way you have economic growth, I mean, put simply, is if people are investing, if there's confidence in the economy, people want to invest, people want to hire more people, and don't forget, the other big kind of headwind here is also AI. So even if it's not the economic conditions that are being created, which are completely kind of horrendous for businesses to operate in. You've also got structural changes in the economy happening, and many companies are letting people go and replacing many of those functions with AI. So it's a tough time to be in business and a tough time to be in making decisions around business investments, etc. So and we're constantly being very pessimistic on this podcast, but at the end of the day, you know, the only thing you can do is hope, and hope is not a very good strategy to, it is not very useful when it comes to these sorts of things, because when you look around you and see what's happening, nothing is going in the right direction.
Well, there's not exactly a lot to be optimistic about at the moment, so forgive our pessimism. Rodney, if we just take a wider lens at the broader global geopolitical situation and what's happening, so much of the discussion around whether a US-led or Israel-led war in Iran would then potentially involve other actors has come up multiple times. I'm thinking here of China. I'm thinking of NATO, and we already saw Iranian missiles head towards Turkey and be intercepted by the Turkish armed forces. NATO's come out and say this is not triggering that NATO clause that basically says an attack on a NATO country is an attack on the entire NATO organization. Are we likely, do you think, to see the involvement potentially of China, of NATO more broadly, or is this going to be confined to the region?
I don't think it'll go outside the region in the short term. I also don't think um, it will go on indefinitely either. But I mean, I don't think that it's going to suck in other outside the region players, and on in that context, I am obviously including Turkey and so on. The risk in terms of Turkey was um, that Trump could have activated as he tried to do the Kurds in Iran to become involved, and that would have caused some um, response or intervention from Turkey. I would have anticipated, but I don't think that we're going to see a broader um, regional activation. Though I did read today that Israel was looking to have a base on Somaliland in order to be able to um, take offensive action in relation to Yemen. So possibly East Africa in some form comes in, but I read it in the context, or I processed it in the context of something they would wish to put in place over the next few years rather than the next few days. So yeah, even then, I'm not sure we're going to see an increased number of people involved. None of the people who are currently involved in terms of Gulf Arab countries and so on who are receiving hits from Iran want to be involved either. I don't think there's a huge queue of people saying, oh, please throw something my way so I can get involved too. I think it's the opposite. People want reasons not to be involved in relation to this because they can't see what any objectives or likely positive outcomes are going to be.
Yeah, I mean, on the kind of, if you take out, I guess, Iran's um, dwindling number of allies, yeah, on the other side, there's also not really if you look at it, a role for anyone else to be involved. I think the US and Israel are, you know, are doing a pretty uh, comprehensive and thorough job of bombing and striking Iran. So there would be no reason for anybody else to kind of come in. And again, it comes down to what what is going to be the end outcome. And each of those countries have domestic audiences that they need to also appeal to. And I don't think any of those countries want to be in a position where they're having to explain to their internal audiences and their kind of domestic um, audience why they were involved in something that is unlikely to reap any benefits, or unlikely to have any real kind of outcome. So, uh, and look, I think Russia, there was some commentary during the week about Russia sharing intelligence with Iran. I think in the background, Russia's probably providing some assistance in those sorts of ways. But Russia's already got its hands full with the kind of war of attrition that it's in with Ukraine. I don't think the Russian military or the Russian economy can sustain another front for Russia, particularly considering that
100%.
they'd be yeah, I mean, particularly they'd be taking on the US, and um, I guess Putin would be doing the calculus and saying, why would I give Trump more reason to back Ukraine? I've got Trump where I want him. Um, and then China, I mean, China's not exactly in a position internally from an economic point of view to put its neck out for Iran. Now, there is a big if here, but or a big disclaimer. Um, you know, I think China will be more heavily involved at the start, probably more on the diplomatic side, if the oil crisis continues, because China, unlike probably other Western countries, is much more reliant on Iranian oil, and you know, uh, so and if you have a sudden shortage of oil around the world, and certainly shortage of Iranian oil. And I believe China has its own oil assets in the region. If there is a threat to those assets and to its supply of oil, I suspect China's involvement will be considerably more. But I think there's a long way to go before that involvement becomes anything beyond just a kind of heavier diplomatic action.
And zooming in on one particular aspect that's been obviously incredibly troubling has been this military investigation, which overnight determined that the United States was responsible for a deadly Tomahawk missile strike on an Iranian elementary school, which the Iranians say killed 175 people, mostly children. That happened on effectively the first day of when the attacks started, and surely this is one of those most devastating military errors in recent memory. Initially, President Trump tried to sidestep that blame for the strike and saying it probably wasn't a U.S. Tomahawk. It could have been anybody else. And then when he was pushed about it, he then said, "I don't know." And Rodney, it's one of those things where you know, you made a good point earlier saying, well, it's just the words of an idiot not to be taken seriously. But I mean, h- how do we sit and be okay with something like this? Like, how do we sit as ordinary citizens around the world listening to the leaders of these massive countries and the world's largest military in this particular case just dismiss these things that are happening and try to evaluate this in terms of, well, this is the new world order where there is no world order and they just basically do whatever they want, and in the process it's innocent people, and in this case children, who suffer.
Look, that's a terrible incident. I've got no doubt that it wasn't a deliberate targeting, but when you get involved in any military action of this type, you've got to accept that the reality is that you're going to end up taking civilian life, and this was a very emotive example of it because of the age and the fact that the number of children who are reported to have lost their lives. So um, that's one thing. Taking the decision to go to war made something like this likely, if not inevitable. But the second point is the just absolute lack of honesty and accountability. First trying to say someone else did it, or lots of people have tomahawks, when it was only something like the Netherlands, Norway, the UK, and US, and maybe one other ally, who were all very unlikely to have done this, apart from the US, who in fact did. And he's still doing it. He was confronted today by a reporter who said that the early military evaluation in the US is that it was an American strike. Do you apologize as the commander in chief? And he said, I don't know anything about it. That's what he's going to do. That's why he's such a, I'm going to say, flawed individual. And I think that use of flawed as a descriptive covers many strands of flaw. Um, yeah, his response is appalling. I don't expect anything better than that Hegseth, just a pumped up idiot as well. I'm sorry, I'm slightly um, um, critical, more so potentially, of some of these individuals. I don't see it about America. American people don't all buy into this nonsense, but who they've elected and who's taken decisions on their behalf are not people worthy of any respect in terms of intellect, thinking, strategy, ethics, anything. They're just not. They're not impressive, and they're much worse than that, sadly.
Is that a view you subscribe to, Ozan? One thing I've struggled to come to terms with a little bit is these leaders exist because people voted them in these democracies, right? Sure, they didn't, you know, Hegseth wasn't a direct choice of the American people, but Trump was. Overwhelmingly, Trump was. And yes, perhaps what he took to the previous election may not necessarily be matching his actions now. You know, he said no forever wars and America first. And obviously, what is happening in the Middle East at the moment is hard to understand how it falls into any of those sort of buckets. But I mean, these people who are ruling the world at the moment, who are our leaders, are there because there was enough people who voted them in. And can you argue, therefore, we're going to get philosophical now a little bit, but can you argue, therefore, that that's unfortunately the price you pay of democratic regimes?
You could argue that, but I don't think it would be wise to, considering where we are in in the world right now, because I think, at the end of the day, we need more strong institutions. We need more countries that are democratic, and what have you. But yes, look, it's you know, unfortunately, democracy does sometimes result in outcomes that I think objectively you could say are not ideal. And we're living through this now. And I think, when you look at the US, I think US is probably the best example of this. Effectively, 30 odd percent, and don't quote me on these numbers, I'm giving pretty top line numbers, but 30% of people didn't vote, and 30% of people voted for Kamala Harris, and a little bit more than 30 voted for Trump. Now, my Republican friends and others, big Trump supporters, etc., will tell you that it was an amazing win and he won so convincingly, etc. Yeah, sure, he did. I mean, he won all of the seven swing states, but the margins were no different from the margins. And in fact, in some states, it was less than the margins that Biden won it with. So, you've got a very polarized country. You've got a very polarized political kind of discourse. It's the same in many countries. In our country, or in one of our countries, Australia, you're seeing the very very rapid rise in popularity of the One Nation Party, which is considered as a kind of far right populist country, led by the Pauline Hanson, who in 1996 made her political debut, and in her maiden speech into Parliament talked about how Australia was being swamped by Asians and all of this sort of stuff. And she's been around for 30 years, and there's a rise in kind of the political support for her party. So you there is a big trend, I think, where people are so discontent with politics. They're discontent with the status quo. They believe that the status quo doesn't work for them, and in many ways, I think they would be right. If you're in the US and you're having to work three jobs just to pay your rent and put food on the table, you're probably going to sit there and say, "Yeah, this system doesn't work for me." So when a man comes and says he's going to fix it and he's on your side and all of this sort of stuff, you probably think, well, at least give it a shot. Why not? It can't be worse than what it is now. So you have it's a very complicated set of factors that have led us to this, and there's many many different layers. But I think underlying and under all of those factors, the kind of overarching theme or underlying theme, I guess you could say, is you know the current system, both economic and political and social system, is not working for people, and this is why we're talking about things like the New World Order, and a new structure or a new way in which we structure society economically, socially, politically. So I think we're going through a period of transition that's very much deeper than just a Trump or another leader that we might consider to be completely, idiotic. But at the end of the day, this is the product, I think, of many many years of a worsening economy, and many years of institutions that aren't working for your regular people. And it's very dangerous because we've seen in the past that all of these sorts of problems, we look at World War I, World War II, etc. You know, the underlying factor was economic, and this is why I guess we're pessimistic on this show, because we've seen an economy over the last 20 years, um, rather than work for people, hurt people. And what we're seeing more and more of is an administration in the US trying to do everything it can to effectively tank the economy. I mean, tariffs. I mean, I can't even believe in 2026 we're having a conversation about why tariffs are not a good thing, when they're done in the way that they were done by the US administration. The tariffs completely set the economy back. Now you've got a world war. Sorry, you've got a regional war, and your oil prices going up. Who knows? They could end up at 150, 200. Um, and that's going to completely set the economy back. COVID set the economy back. So you've just had, and at the end of the day, who suffers? It's the people who who are having to work 3 jobs to make ends meet. And they're the ones who are angry, and they're the ones who say, you know what, I'll take a gamble on someone who says they might act, who I believe understands me, and I believe might actually do something that might get us out of this complete mess that we're in. And the Republicans are very good at it, and the MAGA people are very good at breeding discontent and really thriving and leveraging people's discontent and anger at their lives. And they're very good at blaming the other people for it, whether it's the Democrats or the elites or George Soros or whoever it is. And unfortunately, people fall for, I don't want to say fall for it, but people feel that there's no harm in falling for that because the alternative they've experienced for the last 20 years, and it's been abhorrent.
I love how at multiple points of this podcast, you both tried to find a different word to describe the current world leaders, and you both landed at a form of either idiot, idiotic, or something along those lines. I mean, you tried to be diplomatic. I'll give you that.
Thought long and hard
Well,
before I settled upon idiot and stupid.
I mean, there are many words that were going through my mind.
I'm sure.
I thought what could best describe it. It's very difficult because it does. I mean, any other word I think gives too much credibility. If you were to pick a more sophisticated word, it's just plain stupidity what we're experiencing.
Oh, you got to have a laugh at some point. Gents, thank you so much both for your time on Put Simply this week. See you next.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.